At the beginning of World War II, both the German and Soviet armies faced a problem. It is that the rifles with which they fight are old and heavy, which limits the movement of the soldiers and prevents them from carrying sufficient ammunition with them, and therefore they were running out of ammunition. The weapon's recoil is so strong that it can dislocate a soldier's shoulder when using it, and it has many malfunctions and is complicated to use. The Soviets tried to solve this problem by relying on the human element, by training soldiers in shooting and aiming. And they developed the Mosin-Nagant rifle, which they used to become a sniper weapon. Therefore, during war, out of every 10 skilled snipers, 9 of them are Soviet. As for the Germans, they relied on developing the machine itself by manufacturing automatic rifles called the MP40, which guarantees a density of bullets and success in direct combat, even if other features such as accuracy and the long range of the projectile are lost. In the Battle of Bryansk, the Soviets noticed how humble their weapons were compared to the German weapons. And this is what prompted Sergeant Mikhail Kalashnikov, who participated in the battle as a tank commander and was wounded during it, to think about designing a weapon to confront the German weapons, especially since the Germans produced a more effective weapon called the STG-44, or storm gun, which Hitler considered hope to win the war. Kalashnikov believed that what hindered the development of Russian weapons was the search for idealism. So he relied on the principle that idealism is the enemy of good enough. He designed a weapon caliber of 7.62 by 39mm, which is a medium caliber and weighs much less than the old rifle. This allowed soldiers to carry larger quantities of ammunition. The weight of the rifle itself, when fully loaded, reaches 4.3 kilograms, which is much lighter than its predecessors. Also, the range of the rifle is less than the old rifles, and you may think that this is a defect. But in a direct engagement, you do not need a sniper weapon, but rather cover fire and a density in the number of shots. And remember the principle that ideality is the enemy of good enough. Kalashnikov also noted the difficulty of learning to use old weapons, with many soldiers dying as a result of misuse. So he designed a weapon consisting of several parts, each part having a specific place like puzzle pieces. Any child over 8 years old can learn to disassemble, assemble, and use this weapon within 1 hour of training. Kalashnikov relied on his practical mechanical experience, which he gained from his work maintaining tractors in Siberia, in an unforgiving environment and weather conditions, and his work on an army tank to design a weapon that has few malfunctions, is easy to maintain, works under the most difficult conditions, and has a shelf life of 20 to 40 years. In addition to its ease of manufacture, its cheap price made this weapon a revolutionary weapon in the field of military manufacturing. But so far, this weapon is just a design and idea that has not yet been implemented. After the end of World War II, the Soviet Union did not abandon the project to develop automatic rifles that it had begun during the war. So Stalin unusually held a competition for anyone who could apply to design an effective automatic weapon similar to the German weapon. Kalashnikov seized the opportunity and applied for the competition, and despite being a sergeant who had not received formal education in armament engineering, he was accepted. After several attempts, Kalashnikov and his team were able to manufacture the first copy of the AK-47 weapon, short for Automatic Kalashnikov 1947. This weapon not only outperformed the contestants who were weapons experts, which prompted some of them to withdraw before displaying their weapons, but it also outperformed the German weapon. The success of this weapon made the Soviet army adopt it as an official army weapon and consider it a war secret. But there are several waves of the spread of this weapon throughout the world. The first of these waves was the result of the formation of NATO, which prompted the Soviets to create a counter-alliance, the Warsaw Pact, in 1955. Now it was necessary for the Soviets to arm their allies, so they supplied them with large quantities of AK-47. But the Soviet factories did not have sufficient capacity to produce these large quantities, so the Soviets granted their allies a license to manufacture Kalashnikovs locally. This has made this weapon spread widely, to the point that there are estimates indicating that its number has reached 100 million weapons, half of which were manufactured outside Russia. This deployment was a test of the weapon's efficiency in different environments, and it passed the test with distinction. For example, in the Vietnam War, it was used by untrained Viet Cong farmers, and American soldiers used the M16 weapon. They were surprised by the inefficiency of the American weapon in Vietnam's muddy and humid environment full of swamps and forests. This weapon suffered from many malfunctions and required constant maintenance, while the AK-47 did not suffer from all of these malfunctions, to the point that American soldiers were waiting to kill any of the Vietnamese fighters in order to take his weapon and use it. And this matter was described as a scandal at the time. The second wave of the spread of this weapon was when the Soviets created the AK-74, which is a better and more efficient version of the AK-47. This made it an old weapon. The Soviet Union decided to put large quantities of the old AK-47 on sale, and this weapon became widespread not only in regular armies, but also in rebellious movements, armed militias, gangs, drug cartels, and the mafia. The third wave of the spread of this weapon was in 1979 when the Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan. The Afghan fighters, who were called Mujahideen at the time, asked the American intelligence to provide them with a K-47 to confront the Soviet invasion. Indeed, CIA officials in Pakistan implement this request and import Russian Kalashnikov weapons from China and give them to Afghan fighters. After that, the United States of America will remain one of the largest importers and distributors of Kalashnikovs. Can you imagine this? And for the first time, the Soviets saw the Kalashnikov being used against them. The fourth and most violent wave of the spread of the Kalashnikov weapon occurred during the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. This led to the disappearance of 80% of the Soviet light weapons arsenal, most of which were Kalashnikov weapons. Some senior leaders and officers sold these weapons to rebel movements in Asia, Africa, and all areas of armed conflict in the world, and these leaders became called the war rich. The ease of using the Kalashnikov and its efficiency in various environments and circumstances made it the weapon of choice for rebels and gangs that use children as fighters in their ranks. And also because it is cheap in some African countries, it was possible to obtain a Kalashnikov in exchange for a cow, or even a chicken, or for free in exchange for joining the militias. If we ask anyone what is the most dangerous weapon in the world, his answer would naturally be the nuclear bomb. But the spread of firearms in the world, whose number is estimated at about 500 million weapons, including about 100 million Kalashnikovs, has made them surpass all bombs and missiles in terms of the number of victims. Estimates say that there are about 250,000 victims who have fallen as a result of nuclear weapons in the world so far, while about 200,000 victims of firearms fall victim every year. And let me remind you that 1/5 of the rifles in the world are of the Kalashnikov type. Mikhail Kalashnikov continued to defend himself throughout his life and believed that he had done what he should have done for his country. But at the end of his life, when he saw his weapons in the hands of children and terrorists, he regretted and wished he had not invented this weapon. And he sent a letter to the Russian church asking whether he would bear the guilt of the thousands of lives victimized by his weapons as a Christian believer. And he signed the letter not with his honorary title, but as Slave of God, the designer Mikhail Kalashnikov. But there is a question: why did Kalashnikov not do with the profits from his weapons like Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, who was called the Merchant of Death because of this invention, and gave a prize for peace and scientific achievement to ease his conscience? Let me remind you that Kalashnikov lived in the Soviet Union, the stronghold of communism. All profits from his weapons went to the state, while he lived poor, relying on a pension allocated to him by the state. It would not be surprised if you found him in a queue for subsidized goods or on a public transport bus. And he did not receive a respectable sum of money until he sold the rights to his name to some local brands such as vodka, and he was 85 years old at the time. Mikhail Kalashnikov died on December 23, 2013, after a long life that began as a national hero and then became an example of the saying, either you die a hero or you live a long time to become the villain of the story.